Hi. I'm gonna discuss a topic that will probably make some people, if you see this, want to post some nasty comments, and that is okay. I want to discuss Twilight, and more importantly, my extreme annoyance at the seeming competition that I see about who hates Twilight the most. Now, just to make it clear, I'm no Twilight fan. I have seen the movies, I have the books, but I haven't read them yet. To me, the movies, they are bad B-movie paranormal romance flicks intended for teenagers. They can give some entertainment, I don't know, 2 hours? Is that the running length of them? 1.5 hours, 2 hours? Something like that, they they give some entertainment while they last, but they give no lasting impact, and they are so full of plot holes and so full of annoying aspects that, yeah, they're pretty bad. Now, here's the problem. When I watched those movies, I was thinking, okay, this is pretty bad. Alright, now the movie's done. What's the next movie I'm gonna see? That's it. My problem is when people talk about Twilight every time the topic of vampires come up. Like, there was a discussion of True Blood. Oh, and this is nothing like Twilight. And then there was a discussion of 30 Days of Night. Oh, and these vampires are nothing like Twilight. Every time vampires are being discussed, no matter what type of vampires, anything, it's nothing like Twilight. Twilight sucks. This is so much better than Twilight. These vampires don't sparkle. Twilight, 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 Twilight. And it drives me insane. Yes, it's bad movies. Let it go. First of all, I find it somewhat ironic that there are so many 30-plus men who hate Twilight, considering that these movies are intended for, well, the books are young adults, which means they are from 11 to somewhere into the 20s. That's the intended target. So it's movies for 14-year-old girls. It is the same as if a 20-year-old boy go ballistic over hating My Little Pony. Well, yes, but you're not exactly in the target audience. Now, I'm not saying that a lot of the criticism of Twilight isn't warranted. My problem is the extreme focus on these movies, and how they have somehow become synonymous with vampires. So that you can't discuss vampires without discussing Twilight, because I just don't think the movies are good enough to be... I mean, I more often hear Twilight in connection with vampires than I hear Dracula or any of the other icons of vampire fiction. And why is these second-rate paranormal romance stories suddenly become so important? And what annoys me more is that it's not the fans I hear mentioning Twilight. I mean, I have a few friends who are fans of Twilight, and I have heard them mentioning the series exactly 2 times. One time was one that mentioned in passing that, oh, I'm going to the movies today to see the newest Twilight movie. I really look forward to it. And I heard one say that I really enjoy watching these movies, and my 12-year-old niece really likes it too. That's it. That's what I've heard from Twilight fans. All the talk about Twilight are from haters. And perhaps I'm letting myself get too worked up on this. The problem is that I really, really, really like vampire movies. And I watch a lot of vampire movies, and it gets very frustrating when I can never go into Amazon and have a look at a vampire movie or a vampire book I want to buy without half the comments and half the reviews being, oh, this is so much better than Twilight. Yeah, I assumed so, and what does Twilight have to do with it? So, yeah. So, because of all this, I find myself having feeling that I have the dubious need to defend this franchise. Yeah, now, like I said, I'm not a big fan. I think the movies are very bad, but I also think that I get too much criticism, and that there seems to be in this. It's hip to hate them. And I don't really understand why, because there are so many bad movies out there. So let me discuss a few points that I think they get a bit too much bashing on. So yeah, the first one is Bella is not a good role model for women. Yes, correct, she isn't. However, do every movie have to have the same politically correct idea? Yes, she is stepping way, way back, and all she does is being damsel in distress. She's also extremely annoying because she's, yeah. But what I don't really understand is that people act like if the world is gonna collapse because you have one franchise with a more with leading lady where the character is presented more like it would have been in the 1970s and earlier. So yes, but everything has to be extremely politically correct. I don't think that a teenage girl that watches Twilight is gonna suddenly be, oh, I want to just sit on my ass and wait for a man to do everything for me. I'm gonna let myself be kidnapped just as much as Princess Peach. That is what I'm gonna do. Because it doesn't work like that. I have always found that a bit annoying, the idea that everything has to be politically correct, or we all have to hate it. Yes, Twilight is not the most... It's not a feminist's wet dream. But so what? Little girls are not gonna think, oh, I want to be helpless and so on. They're gonna think, I want the good-looking boyfriend and I want the nice dresses. And I mean, if this movie had been made quite a while ago, I might have agreed that when all the fiction showed weak female characters, who just waited around for men to make decisions for them, then every such piece of fiction sort of drove home the idea of what women should do. But when it's one franchise who might not be politically correct in that direction, I don't see the enormous problem. I see it as much more problematic that Bella is manipulative, that she uses those around her, and that she obviously has some serious psychological problems, than the fact that she is somewhat passive. So, yeah. The second point that a lot of people argue is that, oh, Edward is a pedophile. No, he is not. Pedophilia is being sexually interested in people below the age of puberty. Bella is nearly 17 in the first book. That is not pedophilia. So, and a lot of nations around the world have people who are 16 can have sex all they want. So we are here talking about a girl who is sexually mature, and while she isn't yet 18, her lover, which she actually doesn't have sex with at this point, is mentally and physically on her same level. Now, what I find very strange is that people who criticize this aspect in Twilight seem to be fine with it whenever it shows up in other parts of science fiction. Because in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, we'll find a lot of cases where people are either grown up very much faster than the normal idea, so that people are sexually like adults while they might be just a few years old, or people who don't age, so they might be teenagers in their bodies but be several hundred years old. So, to make a few examples, in Star Trek Voyagers, you have, oh, what is her name? Cass, I think. She's an Ocampa who has a 9-year lifespan. So when we first meet her, she's 1 year old. And she is in a relationship with another alien, and while I don't think it's mentioned how long his race lives, they seem to have about the same lifespan as humans, so he seems to be somewhere in his 30s. Is this pedophilia? Because Cass is an adult in her race. Or have, for example, in the Vampire Chronicles, where you have Claudia, and while she doesn't have direct sexual relationship, it is on the border, but yeah, there are definitely romantic relationships for her, and she has a 5-year-old's body, but she has an adult mind. You will encounter such things in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and why is it singled out in Twilight? I could go on all day with examples in science fiction where there's a huge age difference between the parties, and where one of the parties are not 18 years old. You have all sorts of things with robots, with clones, with vampires. It's pretty standard fare. It isn't pedophilia. So, unless you think it's pedophilia when you have a fully developed robot who then have a relationship with a human person, and that robot might just be a few days old, but they have a They're adult in every other way, unless you think that's pedophilia. And unless you think every piece of vampire fiction where you had a young girl who then have a relationship with a vampire who is a couple of 100 years old, unless you think all of that is pedophilia, then it isn't pedophilia that Edward have a relationship with Bella. So, yeah. And just to make a final point on that, in Bram Stoker's Dracula, both Lucy and Mina are actually quite young. Lucy is 19 years old, and I don't think it's mentioned in the book exactly how old Mina is, but she might actually be around 18. So then she would be just over the border, and she is actually engaged to be married to a human man. And while in the book there isn't a direct relationship with her and Dracula, there are undertones of it. The idea of an old vampire having a relationship with a sexually mature but perhaps under the legal age a human, that's nothing new, and it doesn't make it pedophilia. Okay, and then we have, of course, the "it's horrible, he sparkles." Yeah. Now, personally, I actually liked that effect in the first movie. Why? Well, because I have seen so many vampire movies, and I like that they do something different. And the idea that vampires aren't destroyed by sunlight, but sunlight somehow reveals some supernatural quality in them. That's actually not used that often and is quite interesting. Now, the effect in the movies are horrible. It's like they just rubbed the actor with body glitter. He looks like an escapee from some sex parade. He doesn't look like a vampire. But still, is it really something to get your knickers in a bunch over? I've seen a lot stupider effects, and while that may make the movie idiotic or make the movie not worth watching, does it really make it so bad that you have to mention it every time you talk about vampires? Another typical complaint is that, oh, but Edward is too nice and this isn't horror. Yes, it's not horror. And it was never intended to be horror. Twilight is paranormal romance. The emphasis on romance. Paranormal romance is a genre of fiction that is basically a romance story but with supernatural and paranormal elements. So that while the difference between a fantasy, science fiction and horror story with romance elements and paranormal romance is that the romance is in focus. And people act like it has never happened before, that you have had nice vampires. And seriously, just to mention something out of the top of my head, when it comes to movies and TV series, you have Eternal Night, which the main character is a vampire who tries to avoid drinking people's blood. Dark Shadows had one storyline about Barnabas trying to avoid drinking people's blood. You'll find books about this all over the place. It isn't a new concept with vampires who are not roar, horrid, run around, rip people in half. Because what if what you're looking for is a horror movie? Then, yes, Twilight isn't for you. But this idea that a vampire story has to be horror, that I think doesn't really work. There are, yes, vampires are great characters to use for horror stories, but that doesn't mean that that's the only place they work, and it doesn't mean that every story and every movie about vampires have to be horror. So yeah, Twilight isn't horror. You should have read the description better. So yeah, and then we come to the Edward abuses Bella physically, and it is somehow celebrating physical violence. I don't agree. Here's why I don't agree. What really gets people blood boiling is that after Edward and Bella marries, their sex gets pretty violent, and she's left with bruises, she's putting herself in danger, and so on. Yeah, it's a vampire story. If you watch many vampire movies, if you read many vampire books, or werewolf books for that matter, and so on, you will find this again and again and again and again, that you have people who have an extreme difficulty controlling primal urges in themselves. So while they do fall in love and they do have these relationships, they are in danger of hurting their lovers. And that isn't celebrating abuse, it isn't celebrating women accepting abuse in the home. If Edward generally slapped Bella around and treated her like shit, and she made excuses for him, that would be celebrating it. Just including an element which are present in so many stories, that he is a monster. He's a vampire, and his animalistic traits threatens to be brought forth when he has sex, so that she's in danger. That isn't celebrating some sort of domestic abuse. That's just having a typical fare in vampire movies. And the last point I wanted to address is the idea that there are only two types of people: rabid Twilight fans and haters. It drives me nuts, because every time I say, people, we are discussing Bram Stoker's Dracula, do we have to bring Twilight into it? Really, why are we discussing it? Oh, you are an enormous Twilight fan, you have to have posters of the actors on your wall. No, I thought the first movie was okay, the rest are garbage, but they don't really matter to me. But I wanted to focus on the setting we were discussing. So, yeah. There are not just two people. It's not like you either love these movies and they are your whole life, or you hate them. Some people actually watch them, think, okay, and move on. Some people even like them, but doesn't do anything else than that, and some people dislike them but don't care. And protesting the idea of bringing Twilight into every discussion about vampires is not the same as being a rabid Twilight fan. So yeah, I think I ranted long enough. It's just a topic that really annoys me, because I want to be able to discuss vampires without discussing Twilight. I don't care about Twilight. And I hate that the first thing people think about when somebody mentions vampire is Twilight. And it's very ironic that it's not the fans that do this, it's the haters. Now, the best way to hate a movie is just ignore it. The more people who just ignore a movie, the less people actually watch it, actually see it, and the less attention it gets. Please, the next time you want to discuss vampires, what about not comparing whatever topic, whatever vampire setting you are discussing to Twilight? What about just discussing that setting? Even mention Twilight doesn't exist. I do. So, thank you for listening to my rant, and have a great day.